Our last graph that we're going to deal with to represent a frequency table is going to be an ogive. Ogives are going to be a little bit different than both frequency polygons and histograms in the sense that we don't use the traditional frequency. Instead, an ogive represents cumulative frequency. It can still be regular cumulative frequency or relative cumulative frequency, where we divide by the total number of data points we have, but either way, we're now going to deal with cumulative frequency. So let's talk about exactly how we're going to set up this graph, and then we'll do an example. Our first step is going to be the same that it has been. We're going to draw and label our axes. And what do we label them? Just like with our histograms, we're going to label the class boundaries on the x-axis. And then we're going to label the frequency on the y-axis. So just our first 3 steps is looking an awful lot like a histogram. Our final step, we're going to plot our cumulative frequencies and then connect the dots once again. So while the first 3 steps look an awful lot like a histogram, our last step makes it think that this is going to look more like a frequency polygon. We're going to have points and lines. However, one of the main differences is that while an ogive does need to start on the x-axis, it will not end on the x-axis. So let's do an example of how to do these. Here we have our cumulative frequency distribution for the US presidents at the time of their inauguration. We did properly form this distribution in the cumulative frequency distribution video. And now we're going to draw the ogive for this. So let's start with our axes. We'll draw our x and y axis and start labeling the class boundaries, which we start at 40.5 and increase in increments of 5. So there's 40.5, 45.5, 50.5, 55.5, 60.5, 65.5, and 70.5. On the y-axis, we need to have our frequencies, but keep in mind this time we're actually going to have to go up to the full 45. So I'll do these in increments of 5. We have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, running out of room here, 40, then way at the top we'll have 45. Can't quite write the 45 in. Now we'll need to actually plot our cumulative frequencies. So let's go back to the table and look at what we have. We can see that our first 2 cumulative frequencies are 2 and 10, so let's plot those. So these always start on the x-axis, so our first point's actually 0. We then have our 2 and go up to 10. So now let's go back to our graph and our frequency distribution and see what our next frequencies are. Here's the distribution. We've plotted 2 and 10. Next we have 26 and 35. Over on our graph we can go up to 26 and then up to 35. Now let's check what the last 2 are. We've plotted 26 and 35, so our last 2 frequencies are going to be 42 and 45. Going back to our table, we will plot 42, or our graph rather, and then 45 way at the top. And then we just need to connect the dots. And now we have our ogive.